Well, let's go ahead and kick this off. So welcome to Advanced Workflows in Action and Unlocking the Automation Potential. I'm Whitney. I'm an Atlassian Solutions Manager at Grid.io. I've worked as an admin with the Atlassian tool stack for over 10 years. It's a tool that I very much enjoy, and I like to jokingly, sort of not jokingly say I'm definitely a fangirl of it. But today we're going to go through the functionality of what I think is one of the most underutilized functionalities of JIRA, and that's going to be workflows. A lot of that has to do with some of the complexity that you can do with them, but they are incredibly powerful. And we'll do some, let's wait for it, live demos, and fingers crossed, we've been good to the IT powers and everything will go smoothly. The agenda for today. So will be as followed. We'll discuss kind of like why workflows matter, the parts of designing custom workflows and like enhancing those workflows with the advanced features, such as conditions, validators, post functions, properties, and then also tying them in with integrations into automation rules and sending out notifications. We'll talk about how you could integrate them into external collaboration tools such as Teams or MS Teams and Slack. And then, and following that, we'll talk about best practices for workflow optimization, as well as rules of thumb and kind of breaking down these advanced functionalities so that they're easier to work through and you can take that away and start applying that to your workflows in your projects. Then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session and we'll talk about some of the things, especially that Grid offers, including office hours. And then we have a new workflow tool that we have released that you can use that's built off of our internal like knowledge of workflows. It's not an AI tool. It's we've built in that fashion, and it can help you. So let's talk about, why do workflows matter? Workflows define how work moves through JIRA. When done right, they can improve efficiency, they can enforce necessary processes, and then they can also enhance collaboration. Common workflow challenges that teams face include like hidden bottlenecks if things get stuck in certain statuses for too long and there's no notification or no alerting to that. Delays, overcomplicated workflows. Sometimes we put in way too many statuses, or maybe there are too many restrictions that make it really difficult to move through the workflow. There's an inconsistent usage of statuses. We don't move issues into an in-progress state or an in-development state. And so the integrity of the data that we look at isn't really reflective of the work that's being done because of that inconsistent usage. And then there may be confusion due to a lot of context switching between tasks. These hold on one second. I'm getting a note that maybe the volume isn't high enough. So is anybody else having problems hearing me? I want to make sure. Okay, perfect. Thank you for everybody that's confirming that. Great. So yeah, and then going back to like, there could be confusion when like just a lot of context switching between tasks because there's a lot of steps in a workflow. Some of them may be unnecessary. These challenges generally can all be solved through either workflow best practices or utilizing this advanced workflow functionality. When you're adding statuses and transitions, you really want to make sure that the workflow isn't overly complicated. And that is like a rule of thumb that when you're creating statuses and transitions, to not be too specific, to make them as reusable as possible. There will be edge cases where you do need a really hyper-specific status or transition, and that's just something that the rule of thumb that you'll need to follow, which is make it reusable. Be as broad as you can when you are customizing and building out those custom workflows and not using the out-of-the-box simplified workflows that are provided by JIRA. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with, where we're going to go and start Okay, so you guys should all be able to see a Kanban board. We're going to talk about this workflow. So for the sake of time, I have pre-created a workflow, but I haven't gone through any of the advanced functionalities, and we'll walk through those, talk about the different areas, what those things do, and how you can remember the process. So think of, let me go ahead and pull up this workflow. And we'll go ahead and open it in edit mode just for the sake of not having to click too much. All right, so think of your workflow as like a road trip. I try to explain things to folks in very common everyday language. Statuses are your stops along the way, right? You're getting in your car, or maybe you're getting on a plane, whatever it is, and the statuses of your workflow are the areas in which you're stopping. And then the transitions are the description and the directions to get to the next stop. And then each stop has different things that exist. That's where screens and those conditions and validators and post functions occur. So in workflows, there are 3 different status categories. If you're familiar with workflows, you may or may not know this, but I do like to touch base on it just because it's good information to know. So when you're creating a status, you have 3 different categories you can put it in. Your gray ones are your to-do. Anything that has work that is needing to happen to it. And then you have your blue ones, which are in progress, and then you're done, which are green. So on this workflow, let me zoom in a little so it's easier to see. Let's go this way. Okay. So as I talked about reusable statuses, we want to make sure that we are being as broad as possible in our status options. So I've pulled in just very generic ones: open, in progress, blocked, resolved, closed, and reopened. And then with those, generalized transitions. From open, you can resolve an issue, close an issue, start progress. Anytime you can put an issue in blocked, unblock an issue, reopen an issue. So now that we have the generalized workflow in place, we're going to step it up a notch by adding in a condition, a validator, post function, and properties. And this is how we can make the workflow do even more for us. So let's start with adding a condition. Now, conditions, they happen before you transition an issue. An example of a condition would be if you only allow certain folks with a certain permission to be able to transition to a certain status. Maybe it's an accept status, maybe they get to send it for review or move it from review to approved. That would be in the condition. You would mark from those statuses to move it from this one to the next one, you would add a condition. So conditions happen before you transition an issue. It's going to make sure that only those who have the permissions to transition issues can see it. Then you have validators. And validators are processed during the transition. Once that move from open to in progress happens, that's when your validators kick off. And they make sure if you have required fields, if you have certain things that need to be done for that transition, it makes sure that those happen at that point. So that's during the transition. And then you have your post functions. And your post functions are processed after the transition. So once it's moved to the next status, it will then, if there are any post functions, trigger those to go off, and that will happen as soon as the transition has completed. And then there are properties, and properties add additional functionality to statuses, to the issues when they're in a certain status. Don't worry, I'm going to go through all of these things one by one, and we'll look at that. So let's go ahead and add, as you can see, of the different statuses, we're going to add that only the assignee can unblock an issue and move it to in progress. So there's only one transition from the blocked status to in progress. So we're going to add a condition that says, okay, if an issue is in the blocked state, in order to move it back to in progress, it can only be done by the assignee. So in order to do that, we're going to click on the transition. That is where you're going to put in these conditions and these validators on the transition. So in this case, blocked to unblocked, I'm going to click on, I want to put in this condition. I want to say only assignees should be able to make this transition. So therefore, you should not show this transition to anyone else. Move that. Okay. So then you can see the different tabs here, and this, it'll tell you exactly what transition you're editing. So we're going to go ahead and add in this condition. There are other options, as you can see, that you can select. We're going to choose the only assignee condition. If you wanted to say only the reporter can move it from unblocked, or any, like a field has to have a certain value in it, any of that, those are things that you can do on the condition. And the condition will hide the transition unless the condition that you've put in place is true. Okay, so now that we have that in place, I'm going to go, because we're going to do a couple of more changes to this workflow, I'm literally just going to close this tab. It will save it into the draft and go back to the workflow view. So that was, we said only the assignee can move an issue from unblock to in progress. Now, let's add a validator. And remember, validators are what happened during the transition. Very common validator is a field is required. So we're going to say, hey, when we transition any issue, let's say it gets created, and now we want to move it to in progress. But the way our team works, we run and keep track of the work that we do by using JIRA teams. So what we're going to do and ensure is that when an issue moves to in progress, that team field is set. And that if it isn't, it will not allow for that issue to transition. So let's go ahead and find that transition. In this case, it's going to be from the open to start progress. And I'm going to click validator. And on this one, we're going to say add the validator that the field is required. Again, there are a lot of other options that you can do. If you use forms, you can ensure that a certain form is attached. If it's a subtask or a child task, you can ensure that you can't, for example, say you have an epic that hasn't been approved. You can make it so that work on tasks cannot be started unless that parent status is in approved. There are different ways that you can, and this is how you can enforce required processes. It is also where you can kind of get yourself in trouble if you put too many validators in place, because what that will do will make your workflow too complicated and set up a lot of barriers to moving tickets through the workflow. And if we have a lot of barriers to that, what you're going to run into is now an inconsistent usage of statuses, because folks are going to continue to do their work and they're going to ignore whether the ticket's in the right status or not because it's too challenging to move it forward. And so it's very important when you're thinking about the validators that you put in your workflow that it really is important to the necessary process of your team. If it is not, rethink about whether you want to validate that. So going back to the validator that we're going to add, let's go ahead and put field required. And then in this case, we'll go here, we'll type in team. Best practice, if you're requiring a field, make sure that it's very clear if that field isn't filled out, like if it's empty, that you give your user an error message that is very clear as to why they couldn't do what they needed to do. So always make sure that you fill out that error message. So in this case, I'm going to put team field cannot be empty. That way, if I don't fill it out, is try to transition it, and I can't, it's going to tell me exactly where I need to make my fix so that I can do that. Great. So now we have added a validator. Next advanced functionality that we can do is post function. The one that I'm going to show is one that I think is best practice for resolving issues. So in this one, the post function that I'm going to put in place is to auto set the resolution. Now, there are times where your resolution is going to be specific and you want to make that set by prompting your users with a screen to select the right resolution. However, there are plenty of instances where when you're working and you're going through work, whether it's just a simple task, that the resolution is simply just done. And there's no need to prompt for a screen to select that and those extra manual steps. So with the post function, I like to put that in place because then you can simply just either transition it using the workflow, drag and drop it in the Kanban board or Scrum board, and values that need to be set will be set. It's really important that that resolution gets set because when you're searching for all resolved issues, if there's no resolution, that issue is not going to show up. It's also potentially, depending on how you have your filters set up, still going to show up in your open issues. And once you've resolved an issue without setting the resolution, it's a little bit challenging to, unless you have the ability to easily move it back to a previous function or a previous status, it can be a little bit challenging to ensure that that resolution gets set. And you have to make sure, if you're not automatically setting it, that you are prompting with a screen to select the resolution so that it gets set. So let's go ahead and go back to this workflow. And as I mentioned, this is going to be for the resolved state. This specific workflow has both a resolved and a closed state. That can be redundant for some teams. For the sake of showing the different possibilities, I included both. Sometimes teams like to have a resolved state that can be reopened, and it's basically like work has mostly been done or is all done, and then reporter and then it'll close it out and it'll be closed and on its way. Again, like I said, those could be redundant. You can remove them if you choose. Don't necessarily need to have them both. You just need to make sure that you are setting that resolution, whether it's if you have a resolved state or whether you have a closed state. So for that post function, I'm going to go to the resolve issue. Again, we set these advanced functionalities on the transition. There's a property functionality that can be both at the status or the transition. But for the sake of your conditions, your validators, and your post functions, those are on the transition. So here, we're going to go to post function. Go ahead. When workflows are created, there are generally 5 default post functions that are just made by the system. You don't necessarily have to do anything with those. I usually just leave them be, but then I'm going to add that post function. As you can see, these 5 ones, none of them say resolve the issue. It's just saying different things for the system to do to ensure that it works accordingly. So with that, we're going to add that custom post function. And as with the validators and the conditions, there are more options than the one I am showing you. But in this case, I'm going to update the issue field. Now, you can do it by a custom field, but we know that resolution is a system field, and so that is going to be found in the update issue field instead of issue custom field, because it's not a custom field. And you can see in the other system fields that you can update in post function for updating an issue field. In this case, I'm going to choose resolution, and I'm going to set it to just done. I'm going to add, and then I'm going to go back to our visual. Okay, so now we have added a condition that says only the assignee can unblock an issue and move it to in progress. We've added a validator that requires the team field to be set when it is transitioned to in progress from open. We've put in a post function that when an issue gets resolved, it's just going to auto set that resolution to done, and you can go on your merry way. There's one more additional functionality that I like to add. I'm going to talk about 2 of them. I'm going to show one. So the one that I'm going to show is marking a issue uneditable. In this case, the reason why I kept the closed status here was to be able to show this on multiple different statuses, the different advanced functionalities. So what I'm going to do is in the closed state, this says when an issue is in this status, I want this functionality to happen. That functionality is going to be when it's in the closed state, I don't want it to be editable. I don't want anything on it to change. That should be the state that it stays in. So to do that, I need to add a property that says the JIRA issue cannot be edited at that state. So I would click on properties. So again, this is on the status. This is not on the transition. So on the status, I would click that when I'm in edit mode and click properties. And here, you're going to put in a property key and a property value. Now, there is, Atlassian has documentation on the different properties that are available depending on the instance you're on, whether it's cloud or data center, and it'll tell you how to use them. There are several other properties that you can use. I'm just showing one of them. All of them have a key, and then they also tell you what kind of value you can put in there. You can make them more complex, or this one is generally fairly simple, which is going to be the key is JIRA issue editable, and you have 2 options you can put in, true or false. Now, in this instance, by default, it's going to be true, even if the property isn't there. If your fields are on the edit screen, they'll be editable. But in this case, we're going to say when it's in the closed state, even if they're on the edit screen, I don't want this field to be editable. Or I don't want any of these fields to be editable when it's in the closed state. One thing I want to point out is the efficiency of this. If this is something that you want to have happen across, like it's just the process, that you want to have happen across projects. One way, without using advanced workflows, is creating multiple view and edit screens in your projects and removing fields that you don't want editable, and having different view from your view screen or from your edit screen, and only have them on your view screen. That's really helpful if you're like, hey, in this status, or here, I don't mind that they view these issues, but I don't want them to be able to edit X, Y, and Z issue. So you need to make it a little bit more custom on they can edit these ones. For example, you want them to be able to edit the assignee. If this property is in place, they will not be able to change that. However, if you're like, hey, when it is in the closed state, I don't want any changes to happen to these tickets, you can put this property in on that workflow. If that workflow is shared across projects, it's going to make sure that any issue in that state, no matter the project it's in, it's just this one thing that you put in, it won't be editable. So it's pretty efficient in that fact. You just have to think, okay, nothing on the issue can be edited when it's in this state. And if that aligns with what you want to happen, then this works great. So I'm going to go ahead and hit add. Now I said I was going to talk about a second property. This one is a little bit more complicated to set up, but it is incredibly useful. So you may or may not have this experience where your instance has so many resolution options, and only maybe 4 or 5 of them apply to your project. One of the properties that you can put in place is what's called the JIRA field resolution include or resolution exclude. And what that does allows you to define what resolutions should be visible. If you have 15 resolutions and only 3 of them apply to your project, if you add this property to the transition to the status, then you can define, hey, only include these specific resolutions. Now, the property value that you put in is the resolution ID. And to get the resolution ID, you'll need to go look at your resolutions, and in this case, and hit edit. And then up here in the browser, you can see the ID number. And that's how you'll write down all of the IDs that you need for your resolution. And when you put it in that key area that I was referring to, you'll separate them, no spaces, just by commas. As I mentioned, you could do excludes or you can do includes. Depending on the nature of what you need to define for those resolutions, includes might be easier. Again, if you've got 15 and you only need 3, writing excluding of 12 instead of the include of 3 is going to take a lot more time. Okay, so now that we have this property in place, let's go ahead and go back to the workflow. So just to re-summarize, we've put in a condition, we've put in a validator, a post function, and then we've added a special property. That condition says only the assignee can unblock an issue and move it to the in progress. The validator is requiring the team field to be set when it's transitioned to in progress. The post function is going to set our resolution to done automatically. And then the special property is going to say when an issue is in the closed state, nothing on that issue can be edited. All right, so let's go ahead and publish this draft. We're going to go back to our project, and I'm going to show you this in action. Okay, so let me clear the grouping. So as you can see, I've added a couple of values to the cards so that I can work through this. I'm going to show first, because we have something in the closed state. Technically, I shouldn't be able to edit anything on here. I can add a comment, but I can't edit the description. I can't edit the assignee, the reporter. I can edit the workflow. So if I needed to reopen it which I can do. Now I can edit these things. But once it's in that closed state, which I mentioned setting the resolution automatically on the resolved state, but not the closed state, you can see here it says unresolved. That's still going to show in my open issues. But what you can see is now I can't edit anything. So let's go ahead and reopen this. And now let's change the assignee. Let's change it to colleague Josh. So now I'm no longer the assignee, but let's just say this is imblocked. Now I put in that condition that only the assignee can unblock an issue. So technically, if it's working properly, I shouldn't be able to move this to in progress. And there was only one transition from that blocked state, which was to in progress. So if I click on here, I don't have permission to transition the issue. That is what we'll see when that condition is in place. So now that I've blocked my ability to do anything on this issue, I'm going to close it out. Josh can handle that on another date. And I'm going to go to one where I am the assignee. Now in this case, I can move it to in progress because I'm the assignee. So move it to in progress. Great. I'm going to drag and drop this to, first I'm going to show you, see how it says unresolved here and it's in progress. I can drag and drop it to the resolved state. Didn't prompt me for anything. I didn't do anything on it, just put it in the resolved state. And you can see that it's resolved and done. And that was the post function that automatically set the resolution to done when it was transitioned to the resolved state. Now, having two closed category states, resolved and closed, my recommendation would be on the workflow to remove the ability to transition an opened, an in progress, and a blocked status to the, and I think the reopen to the closed state, because it doesn't automatically set the resolution. Now, if you still want them to be able to basically bypass the resolved state and just go straight to closed, totally fine. I would recommend that you add that post function to the status, the transition of any of the open to closed. So that way you don't end up with what looks like here, a status in the closed state, but it's unresolved, meaning it's still going to show up in your metrics as being an open ticket. Problematic. Okay, update. Now we put in the validator that the team field is required to transition to in progress. So in this case, you can see on this ticket, reopened, this is, I'll open it so you can see, but it's the team field, okay? So it's filled out. So I can move it to in progress. Oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe I added the wrong team field. We might have to go back and check it because there was two team fields and I may have put the wrong one in there. So let's go back and fix that. Project settings. I like to work in the diagram mode. It's easier for me to visualize, but by all means, you can do all of this in the text mode. So in this one, we have a validator, which says if the value for team is not provided, but it looked like there was two team values in there. So I'm going to go in and add the other one and remove, hopefully, actually, let's make this a little bit easier. Let's say due date has to be set, given that there's two values. Go ahead and publish that. Okay. Go add this. Due date. Okay. Thank you for letting me do that little detour. Okay, so now we've put that in where due date must be set. So there's nothing set here. If I go to put it in progress, it's not going to let me, but I need to remove. At least the tech gods are happy and they're not blocking anything, but I'm moving too fast. So let's remove the old one because okay. So now let me close this, reopen it. Let's go ahead and move it to in progress. Transition failed, please set due date. Okay, so now I'm going to go to the due date. I'm going to say it's due tomorrow. Now I can transition it to in progress, and there we go. We're good. So that is the validator where it's saying, hey, we're requiring a field to exist in order for you to start work on it. So we've done the post function, we've done the validator, and we've done the condition. And I showed you the special property. So beyond that piece, now I want to talk about how we can even go above that, which to take it a step further, which is to set an automation rule that will send a notification when an issue that the priority is highest priority and it moves to the blocked state. What it's going to do is then send that notification out to a specified individual. So we're going to set this up in our automation rules. Go to project settings and click automation. Create rule. So in this case, the trigger we want is when it transitions. So when the issue transitions to blocked. We don't care what status it is in because any status can transition to blocked. We're just to say when it transitions to blocked, if the issue value priority equals highest, so then we're going to do what's called lookup issues. This is going to let us send a summarized list of potentially, if it's more than one issue, all issues that are in that state that need to be looked at. We'll put in blocked and priority is highest. I'll validate the query, make sure it gives me a check mark. Second, then after doing that, I'm going to add a comment. So now, comment on the issue. And I'm just going to basically let the reporter know, hey, it's because it's been marked block and it's of highest priority, we've escalated it for review. And prevent duplicates by only adding this comment once. I'm also going to add in an email notification. So we're going to send an email. In this case, we're going to send it to the assignee. We're going to put a subject in that is basically blocked issues, requires your attention, and then set up the email. Next, and you'll turn on the rule. Send note what? Yeah. Turn on. So now what that's going to do when the rule runs, where's my button? Is it blocked? Okay, well, I can't run the rule for some reason. It's not showing me the button. So I can show you a snippet of the email that would come through when basically when an issue is blocked and its highest priority, it's going to send an email notification to the assignee that says, hey, this issue just got moved to blocked. Ideally, the assignee is likely going to be the one that's going to move it to blocked. So you could add another field in there, make it be the manager, make it be somebody else that needs to be notified in that case, because the assignee is going to know. And maybe it's the project manager and they need to schedule some meetings to figure out the requirements and why it's blocked. A lot of different ways that you can send that notification, but basically it's just going to give, that notification is going to give like a snippet of the lookup issues, show you as we showed in the email, the key, the summary, and the URL. Basically all of the information needed to quickly access that ticket and view it and figure out who needs to be involved in the conversation to get it moved from being blocked. So that is another way that you can take your workflows and advance them to work for you even further. You don't have to know, like the assignee doesn't have to do anything. In this case, like if we were to set it to maybe the project manager or a manager, we've said for this automation rule, when this happens, when this transition occurs, send a notification out. You can also integrate this using a simple webhook into Teams or Slack. It's not difficult. I'm not going to fully set it up here, but I'm just going to show, send a Slack message. You'll create the webhook or your Slack admin if you're using Slack. Teams, you can get it from the channel. Create the webhook. Just like I formatted that email, you'll format the message. You'll identify the channel, or if you need to send it directly to a user, you'll put that in there and hit go. And now, so if you don't want to get emails, instead you're like, hey, I want everything to go to this Slack channel, it'll send a notification of this directly to the Slack channel with all of the information needed in that channel, just like it was with the email. And so you can integrate it with other tools. It doesn't necessarily just have to be an email notification. Okay, so we've gone over different ways to advance your general workflow, different ways to utilize an automation rule to do stuff that you don't necessarily need to think about, right? If you don't have it in place, then you're manually, oh, hey, this is in the block state. Now I need to go contact this person. I need to find out what's going on. We need to set up a meeting. They do all of that stuff. You can automate that as your stuff moves through workflow transitions. So now I'm going to flip back over. We're going to do a quick summary and then move into our QA. Okay, what? Find my window. Great. All right, so our takeaways. Remember, your workflow's like a road trip. Actually, let me take a quick step back and let's talk about some best practices. I talked about the rule of thumb. Make your statuses and your transitions reusable when able. That's going to be like the default. Identify like, hey, can another team use this without me needing to give them context? Will it apply to them? The answer is yes. Great. You're in good working fashion. Use workflow schemes or the workflow functionalities I just showed you to help standardize processes. You can monitor your workflows with different JIRA reports and like logs to see, are things being stuck in bottlenecks? Are they sitting in a status for too long? Those are different ways that you can make sure your workflow is set up the best for your team. A couple of takeaways from what I have just talked about is, like I said, your workflow is a road trip. And I want you to think about that so you can remember the different functionalities and when they happen, right? Your statuses are your destinations. Your transitions are your directions. Your conditions, your validators, your post functions are what happens after you've stopped, when you've stopped, and then where you're going. Now, that condition processed before transitioning the issue. Make sure that somebody has to have the right permission to even see the transition. Validators happen during the transition. They make sure if a required field is set that a value exists in it. Post functions happen after the transition. We've moved it into the status of closed, the status of resolved. Now set that resolution to done. I don't have to do anything. I've told the workflow to do it for me, and I just go on my way. And then properties can add additional functionality to issues in statuses and transitions. Just like I did with that closed state, the status of closed, put that non-editable option in there. So when it's in a closed state, changes cannot be made to that ticket. Q&A. I wanted to talk, I mentioned earlier, just two things. One thing is Grid.io has released a JIRA workflow builder. And this is built, it's not built on AI, it is built on our own knowledge. It's using really complex algorithms and code to kind of build that out for you. You can scan that QR code to try it out. You can have it fix an overly complicated workflow, help it design one for you, just kind of tell it what you need and play around with it. We just released it last week, so I hope you can get some good use out of it and share it with others if you think it'll be useful to get more feedback for us on it, but it should be a really good tool. I haven't seen anything like it minus using general AI tools, and I'm pretty excited about it. Second is we're doing a thing called office hours, and it's basically your opportunity. It is free. We have 20 slots, and it's your time to get like real-time JIRA support. If you have a problem that you need help on, you want to ask a solution, you want to get a recommendation on something, you can get this real-time JIRA support from our team. Go ahead again, you have 20 slots available. You can scan that QR code and sign up. It's totally free, just something that we want to offer to the community. So now I'm going to open it up to questions. Go ahead and see a couple of them have been sent to me. So first question, how would you change the second item when you are closing out a ticket? For instance, I have a ticket that shows closed, unresolved. So in order to change this, if you are unable to move the ticket back into a active state to then trigger the resolution, you're going to have to do a bulk set change on it. And that's why I talk about that post function, because the number of times I have had to work with teams to get that fixed, for those that it's a closed state and you can't reopen it, that's how you have to edit it. You can add a reopen state into your workflow. There are a couple of ways to do that, but that's really what you would have to do. The next question, is there a way to prevent users from changing the assignee field either in JIRA or through workflow rules? Yes. So this case, because it's one field that you want to restrict from being changed, you're going to have to edit that based on the screen. And default JIRA, you have a view edit screen. You can split it into two screens. And on your view screen, you can have it there. But on the edit screen, meaning anything that you would want to be editable, you'd remove assignee from that screen, and then they wouldn't be able to edit that field. You can also restrict some of those fields by putting in different rules to make sure that if you want somebody to be able to change it, if it's no one should change it, then the best way to do that will be with your screens. Great point. Very glad you brought it up. I didn't reopen a resolved ticket because it had been resolved, but the other point was good practice is to clear the resolution field when you reopen the ticket. That is another post-function option, where if a ticket is in a resolved or closed state and it moves to reopen, when it moves on that transition, you can put in a post function that says clear the resolution field. That's a great practice. The automation that I showed, it does not only work with Slack. It can work with it. It's initially set up to work with email. So you can send it to an email. You can send it to a specified email, or you can send it to the assignee, the person who's in the reporter. You can set it up with MS Teams. You can set it up with Slack. It doesn't just work with Slack. It can work with all the three that I have named. You can also do it as a comment. It's very versatile. Are transitions and validators unique to the project, or do projects need their own workflow to be unique? Transitions and validators are unique to the workflow. So if you make a transition condition, a transition validator, a post function on a workflow, any project that uses that workflow, those will be applied to it. Let's see. Okay, here's a scenario. Let me read this. Inherited a JIRA instance with 100+ projects and 88 individual workflow. Is there a way to find which workflows have trigger, validators, post functions without editing each workflow and manually clicking on each transition to find custom triggers, validators, and post functions? Natively, no. There are some plugins that you can use that can bring that up. There are some that are paid, and then I believe there might be one that is, I think it's called Optimizer, that is free. But natively, as far as I know, if somebody else knows and can drop it in the chat, there's no way to, at least on JIRA Cloud, you can, if you have, again, it requires a plugin. If you're on Data Center and you have Script Runner, you can write a script that can check the workflows and see what is on those. But again, you do need Script Runner to do that. So, or somebody access to your database. Can't do it in cloud because we don't have the Java API and access to the database in that same function. Is there a way to restrict the creation of duplicate workflows? For example, if a workflow with same statuses, can we find such duplicate workflows? So the only way to restrict the creation of duplicate workflows, if it's company managed projects where you're making them at the instance level, that's going to be permission restrictions like project roles and training. There's no, as far as I know, there's no way to like restrict, hey, this already exists. What JIRA will do is if you're editing a status that is used by multiple workflows, it'll give you a warning and say, hey, so say I was changing the in progress status, and that is being used by every single one of my projects, and I am in there and I am editing the name. It's going to give me a little warning that says, hey, this is being used by other projects. If you change it here, it's going to change across all of them. That is the only duplicate or like change that's going to affect other things with workflows that you get. But in the sense of restricting the creation of duplicate workflows, that's a training and restricting like at the project permissions level or the instance permissions level. So if it's company managed projects, how you decide who can edit a workflow and who can create workflows will be at the JIRA admin level. Next question, is there a way to prevent two users in JSM to editing the same issue? I might need more context on this, but I'll speak to it in the sense like, if you want to specify, hey, I don't want these two users to edit the issue, you can do that. You can specify that. If you don't want them to edit the same issue, you're going to have to define that in whether it's by project role or the assignee or the reporter. If you're like, hey, only this person can edit it and not this person, there are ways to do that, but I'm going to need a little bit more context to be able to answer that. I'm sorry. All right, this question may expand beyond just workflows. My organization uses JSM. Is there a way within the workflow transitions to prompt a user to select a knowledge base article when transitioning a request to resolved? So this would likely be done using a required field and making sure that that field is not empty when you're transitioning a request to resolved. So to prompt a user, you're going to use that through screens. So you're going to create a screen that has the field where they're going to put a knowledge base article. If it is the built-in functionality of a knowledge base article, you might be able to identify that. I can't speak to it directly, but if it's like adding a URL to it to not get too complex, you're like, hey, this knowledge base article URL field needs to not be blank. So on your screen that you would prompt on the resolve when you transition, you'd have that field. And then on your workflow, you would specify on that specific transition the validator to confirm like that field isn't empty. That would be one way of kind of doing that validation. Next, is it possible to add a reason for closing out a ticket to avoid it stating unresolved? Is it possible to add a reason? So you want to make sure to avoid it stating unresolved. The way to do that is either prompt with a screen to set the resolution or to auto set the resolution. If you want them to add a further reason, whether it's a note in a comment or sometimes when tickets get canceled, there's a custom field that's like reason for canceling, whatever that might be. You can kind of put that all in there. But in order for it to avoid stating unresolved, you're going to have to either prompt them with a resolve, like a screen to set the resolution, or you're going to automatically set the resolution. And if you want more information, you can create a custom field and also put that field on a screen. Okay, now here's another scenario. JSM and JIRA software are deployed. JSM is used by business users, end users, while JIRA software is exclusively by the IT team. Can the advanced workflows in JIRA software facilitate an approval process that involves end users, business users, who are not a part of the JIRA software licensed users, but they are using JSM? Short answer, yes. Long answer, and I have implemented this. We are over by 1 minute. I am happy to answer this question on call, and then we'll have to end. But the long answer is yes. What you'll need to do is set it up so that the two projects can communicate, and it'll involve different workflow automation transitions. So for example, software team has moved a ticket into needs customer approval. When that happens, it triggers a transition, and it's complex, but it would trigger a transition on JSM to then say, okay, well, when the linked issue transitions to this, then I want you to transition the JSM ticket into an approval state and prompt the customer to check the implementation and approve that it's working as normal, and then they would approve it. If it's not, they would decline it, and you would have it go into different states and process that way. So the answer is yes, it does require building out complex advanced workflows and a couple of automations to tie them all together, but it is possible. I have built it out, as I mentioned. If you're interested in learning more, please contact us and we can chat and maybe help you build that out. Might be a great thing to bring to our office hours.